Good afternoon. Today I'm talking to Matt Hilton. Good afternoon, Matt. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, hiya Donna and hiya viewers. Hello there. I'm Matt Hilton. I'm the author primarily known for writing the Joe Hunter thrillers, of which there's 13 in the series to date. I also write a second series featuring Tess Gray and her partner called Nicholas Paul Villaire. Currently writing book 9 in that series, albeit I'm saying writing, I've written about 3 pages in the last month, you know, things are. But other than that, though, I also write other standalone books, primarily thrillers, some horror, some supernatural. So I'm a bit greedy for readership, you know. So I skip, I skip back and forward, and try and see whatever frame of mind I'm in at that moment. I try to appease that readership and also my own Johns to get it out on the page. So yeah, I do this full time now. I used to be a police officer until 2008 when I was lucky enough to get picked up by a publisher. It allowed me to write full time. So I'm still at it now. Intend to carry on for many years to come till you're sick of listening to me.
And did you always want to write?
Oh yeah, I was a writer basically from. I remember one of my earliest memories. I was always doing something that was creative, whether that was making models out of plasticine, whether it was drawing or painting, or writing my own little stories. As far back as I recall, I was doing something. We came from a poor house, and by that I don't mean it was full of love and full of care and stuff like that. I had 4 brothers, and we were all of an age group. There was only something like 5 or 6 years between the oldest brother and the youngest brother. My dad was a hard-working man. My mum, stayed at home, tried to raise us. But we didn't get loads of stuff lavished upon us, as you can imagine. So we got handed like a colouring book, or we got handed some pencils or some plasticine, and we're, encouraged to entertain ourselves. So we all became creative in that way. I've got a brother who's a professional musician, one who's another author, Jim Hilton, he's an author of thrillers as well. My other brother, Dave, he's like a landscape gardener. I had a brother, unluckily we lost him recently, but he was a tattoo artist. So we all became, in one way or another, creatives. So that was right from early on, yeah.
And did you read a lot as a child?
Yeah, I read a lot as a child. I read, made stuff up, concocted stuff all the time in my head. I was always playing in my head. Or one of me and my other brother John, we used to play a game where we'd imagine, we were these characters and we'd go off on mad adventures, and so in one way or another we were either playing, reading, or acting. So even things like Japs and Commandos, I know that's probably not a very PC term these days, but we were forever playing stuff like that. You were making up adventures and going off and, and saving the world. That kind of idea right from the word go. As I got into school, I started picking up books and I was encouraged to read. One of the earliest books I remember reading was Bambi, that the Disney movie was based upon. And it was one of my first attempts at writing a book as well, was trying to write my own kind of pastiche of Bambi, where these deer were in a copse of woods and they were getting pushed out because they wanted to build a property on the land, and then Douglas Adams came along and did it with Watership Down, probably, a million times better than I did at 6-year-old. But it was around about the same time, so that was one of my earliest attempts at writing. Yeah, so a bit crazy, but it's one of my early memories. Nuts.
And what made you go into the police force then?
That was a kind of circumstance. It wasn't ever a dream of mine to become a police officer, and I'm not denigrating the job or anything. What I did was, I came out of school with this idea in my head that I was possibly going to go into the military, into the army in particular. Things didn't work out. I ended up having to go to work and get a job. And then I met my missus, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. And then we ended up having a family, and I ended up never ever going in the army. But I think I had that in the back of my mind. So, after a couple of years, I kind of went into security work. I wanted something disciplined, something that was honourable in my own mind. So I ended up in the security business. private security business and worked my way through for about 18 years. And it just happened at the time I was working for Marks and Spencer as a regional loss prevention manager, and it was when they started going into kind of trouble back in the early 2000s, and they started restructuring the business, and they wanted me to, I was an employee of Marks and Spencer at the time, and they wanted to put it out to third party, and I kind of split the dummy a little bit. I just thought, I'm not going to go back to what I started doing 18 years previous, you know. So at the time I'd made a lot of friends in the police force, and they encouraged me to join. Next thing I knew, at 38-year-old, I was down at Hilton on the parade ground in a police uniform thinking, what the bloody hell am I doing here? So I ended up, you know, it was circumstance that led me into the police force. But then I ended up working for Cumbria Constabulary. I live in Cumbria, in the north of Cumbria, and I worked in the police, but all through those years, I wanted to be an author. You know, so even when I was working in security, working in the police, I wanted to be an author, and I was writing, and I was, you know, I was sending books out to publishers and agents, etc. So I was actually on the job as a cop when I finally got the call from my agent, Luigi Bonomi, to say that he'd sold my first novel. And it was just like, you know, and everything changed overnight. I had to give up being a cop to be, you know, become a professional author, more or less as quick as that. So it was wild.
Yeah, I bet.
But I've been not publishing, beg your pardon. I've been kind of submitting books since I was about 18 years old, and I was 38 years old by the time I got my break. No, I wasn't. I was 42 years old by the time I got my break. Beg your pardon. See, I'm a writer, not a mathematician. So, so you can see it was a long time coming, you know, coming and trying. So it was a bit like, yeah, the longest overnight success you've ever seen. It was a bit like that. Many years behind me.
And when you wrote your first book, were you planning on writing a series?
Do you know something that came about because of a kind of an epiphany that I had? It wasn't the first book I wrote that got published by any means. Like I said, I've been writing books for donkey's years before that and never ever got anywhere. But I came close several times. 9 years before that, I submitted a book to Hodder and Stoughton, just as onto the slush pile, and I'd only written about 30,000 words of the book, to be honest, and they asked me to deliver a manuscript of about 128,000 words by September, and this was July, and I was working full time at the time and raising a family, and I kind of rushed it. I rushed it to get finished, so I kind of missed an opportunity there. There was another time where I was shortlisted in a write a novel competition with Writers Forum magazine, and I came second. You know, so there was a couple of things like that where I came close, but it was like close but no cigar. It was those situations, and I could tell you various different stories. You know, similar where I came very, very near, and then, you know, it was snatched away at the last second. So back in them days, I didn't know another author. We didn't have, you know, we didn't have social media the way we have now, and I didn't have any other contacts. I was sat on my own in the northern corner of Cumbria, writing away myself, and my only resource at the time was like a writers magazine, a writing forum magazine, and Writers and Artists yearbook. You know, and this was all, these were the things, that the tools that I was using at the time to reach out. And the several books that I had come close with, I realised that they were open and shut. They were standalone novels. And when I looked at the books that I was reading series. So I was reading things like Jeffrey Deaver, and I was reading, you know, like some Michael Connolly and John Connolly, no relation, but they just happened to be both Connollys, and Robert Cray, people like that. And I realised that, hang on a minute, why am I writing standalone books if all the books that sell in shops tend to be long-running series? Now, at the time, I'd written a book called, at the time it was called Jubal's Hollow, and it was featuring some different characters. but when I looked at it, I thought, you know, if I change the scenario around here a little bit, I could get like more legs out of those characters. I could send them off around the world on different adventures. So I'd done a rewrite of the book at that time, condensed it down a bit, and Simon Koenig had just made it big that year. I don't know if you're familiar with Simon's books. He's a terrific author.
Yes.
And I happened to look in the back, and he thanked his agent, who was a guy called Luigi Bonomi, and I hadn't heard of him or anything, but I just thought, I'll take a punt on this agent, yeah. And I sent off my book to him. Now, it's kind of famously, he passed on my book. It was reported in the newspapers that his wife picked my book off off the slush pile. And it wasn't just random Mrs. Bonomi walked in the office and picked this book up and said, you should publish this. She's actually a, very, very clever and skilled editor in her own right. And she'd been looking, at the time there'd been some kind of suggestion in the writing circle, crime fiction circle, that Lee Child might retire. And I think there was a bit of a scramble on for different publishers to find the next Lee Child. So I just happened to send in this book at the right time and said in my approach letter that it might appeal to readers of Robert Cray and Lee Child. And it was that made Alison pick it off the slush pile and say, maybe you should have another look at that. Don't forget they're looking for, the next men's action thriller writer or whatever like that. So I actually I was very, very fortunate. Otherwise, it would have been just back to the old drawing board again, and keep going. So that's how that I know it was a bit of a long story short, but that's how that character's, the Joe Hunter character came about. Originally, it wasn't called Joe Hunter at all. I sometimes get people saying, "Oh, it's called Joe Hunter. It sounds like an 80s action hero," but that was deliberate. I actually originally called him Evan Hive, and it was pointed out to me that it sounded more like a villain's name, and that hive is like an itchy, scratchy, condition of the skin in America, so it might put some people off picking it up as a character. So they've done a straw poll at Hodder and Stoughton and decided to call my character Joe Hunter instead. But I mean, he's grown on me since then. I mean, he's a character who's grown in my head. I've been with him now for 13 years or so. So I feel like I know Joe inside out as if he's a real person. It's a bit weird. Authors get like that, sometimes.
Trust me, the things that I would have thought weird a year ago now, my weird radar is
par for the course.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but you create great stuff from it, so it's fine.
Well, that's where it comes from. It's just a lot of people keep asking me, Joe Hunter's an ex-soldier, ex-elite soldier, if you don't know the character, but I've done him retired and he's out in the world and he's a bit of a vigilante, or he's the go-to guy if, you want assistance. He's, like the Equalizer with Edward Woodward, or more recently with Denzel Washington. He's kind of a similar character to those, but I made him a Northern Englishman and sent him over to America, because what the books I was reading at the time, all the heroes were American. And I wanted to develop this, like a British hero who could stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the, the established names in the US. And people often ask me, well, why didn't you write about a policeman? Considering I was a policeman, and it was like, last thing I wanted to do, I was working as a cop. The last thing I wanted to do was come home and write about being a cop. So I wanted a larger than life, adventure character that I could send on these wild and crazy, gunfights and car chases and that. And it's another reason why I sent the character to America, because I just thought, you try to set something like that in England, you can maybe get away with one action adventure in England, but you can't maintain it without losing credibility, whereas in America, you've got that huge, vast arena That's, you know, it's the frozen north to the tropical south and everything in between. Big cities, small cities, mountains, deserts. You know, you can build a story out of the location, which I do quite a lot. You know, so that's why I sent him off to America. Plus, you know, you can get away with saying, you know, somebody had a machine gun and somebody had a pistol, and you know, I often laugh, you know, if we had a car chase in Cumbria, they'd come up there and six and get trapped by sheep at Shap, you know. That'd be the adventure finished with, you know. So.
Yeah, I've been to Cumbria twice, and my abiding memory is hills and sheep. That's
hills and sheep, hills and sheep.
Yeah, hills and
Yeah,
sheep.
you know. They sell it these days. They sell well these days, hills and sheep, as a location.
Yeah, it's produced quite a few authors actually.
There has recently, Mike and Graham and Les Morris. There's quite a few people have kind of come out the woodwork. So
yeah,
I've got a
Mark
bunch of friends
as
now.
well.
Yeah, Matt, yeah. There's several of us all around here now, and there's a load more that are up and coming, who will be probably big names in the future. You know, the Anne Bloxwich and Lucy Cameron and Linda Wright and Irene Patterson and people like that. They're all Jackie. Jackie's name just went right up my head, and she'll bash us around the ear all next time she sees us. It'll come back to us. But I'd like to think that I was a bit of a inspiration to some of them. You know, me and Graham Smith. I know you've spoken to Graham Smith, John Ryder, Graham Smith, and Mike Craven. We're all pals. We're all close friends and stuff. And I mentioned earlier Jim Hilton as well. He's my brother. He's got 4 books, 4 thrillers out as well. So there's been a bit of a renaissance of crime fiction around Cumbria. We put together the first noir at the bar in England at Carlisle, and you know, so we're all buddies, and we all pull each other's, read each other's books, and insult each other on various occasions. But it's all good fun. It's all meant in fun.
Yeah, I've heard Mike Craven has quite a reputation for that, so it did make me laugh.
I can wind you up.
Yeah, I was speaking to him in June, so that should be fun.
It's good fun. It's good fun, really.
Yeah. So if you were a character in any of your books, would you get on with your main characters?
Do you know something? I'd like to think that Joe Hunter embodies everything I'd like to be, but I'm about 5 stone heavier than him. You know, it's a bit like that. He's younger, more handsome, and a little bit more, you know, he's more skilled than me. But I'd like to think that we'd get on because we're of the same kind of mindset. Joe Hunter's probably the nearest to me, apart from, you know, he's not afraid of you know, taking the lethal option. I can't say I've ever done that. But, you know, obviously it's my thoughts in his head when I'm, you know, when I'm writing him. So I think I would get on with Joe. I think he's similar to me in character, if not in the way it delivers, you know, his thought process. He's a bit of an action man, whereas I just sit behind a computer and type, you know, that kind of thing. He's got a pal called Rink, and Rink is actually a Asian American. It's his old pal from the military days. And I put them together so that they were like the odd couple, you know, like an Englishman from Manchester and an Asian American. And I like to play them off each other for humour, because otherwise the stories would get a little bit dark and grim, and they're a little bit, you know, violent in places. And I use them as, you know, they often poke fun at each other about the you know, the differences between the English language, you know, so, and what side of the road Joe drives on and bits and pieces like that, you know. So I think I'd get on with both those guys, because I'm often making up little jokes for them to share. So I think I'd get away with them quite well. Yeah.
And would you give any their own spin-off?
Do you know, people have been asking for years for a Rinkton, a Jared Rinkton or Rink spin-off, you know, give him his own book. There's even the Facebook page. God, we want a rink book or something like that. The only thing is, it's only got about 6 followers, so you know, and I think I'm one of them, you know. So we'll wait. You know, people do keep saying that though. You know, they'd like to see a rink book, and he could carry his own book. He's a strong enough character to carry his own. Do you know what's a bit weird? You know, in a lot of I don't know if you read them, but you know, a lot of the times you have like a main character and they have a sidekick, and it's a sidekick who's the one with the skills who can maybe get away with a little bit more. I've kind of spun them so that Joe's more like the sidekick, albeit the story's from his point of view. You know, so it's Jared Rinken or Rink who's the private investigator, and Joe just kind of works for him when bits and pieces need doing. So I've kind of spun it on its head a little bit. So I hope it's a unique little twist, you know, but we'll see. There'll be other people doing similar, you know. So people, interestingly, I'll just put this out there for the record, and I mean this most sincerely. I've a hell of a respect for Lee Child and for his character Jack Reacher. Everybody thinks so that I was a Jack Reacher clone. And I'd never read a Jack Reacher book when I started writing Joe Hunter, you know, but everybody kind of, I always get it's not as good as Jack Reacher. Oh, it's better than Jack Reacher. But, you know, I mean, Lee Child did help me out at the first, you know, because it was just kind to me and said, you know, if there's any assistance you need, blah, 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 be in touch. And he's been pure gentleman. And it was the PR teams that kind of, if you like Jack Reacher, you'll like Joe Hunter and that. So I came from a different writing background. I came from fantasy, horror, you know, men's adventure books, and I kind of coalesced all this into an action thriller. So that was where I kind of led into crime fiction from, different avenue than a lot of people. I've never read a Sherlock Holmes or an Agatha Christie or, you know, some of the classics. I very rarely read police procedurals, you know, so I just, you know, there's been assumptions made about, you know, where my characters come along. It wasn't a clone. It wasn't a copy of anybody. I was amalgamating previous characters I'd written from the past. Conan the Barbarian and people. Conan the Barbarian probably influences Joe Hunter more than, you know, any kind of modern peer characters that I could mention. So it's a bit along those lines. I look at my books also as kind of contemporary westerns, if that can be said. Joe's more like the wandering marshal who, you know, solves the bad guys, you know, and then on to the next adventure. And I think that's where it's similar to Reacher, if people read Jack Reacher. Reacher's a thinking man, though, whereas Joe's an action man. Does that make sense? That's where the difference happens. Yeah. I kind of went off tangent there, but
yeah, no, fair enough. That's amazing that Lee Child reached out as well. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I mean, it was a bit stunning actually. You know, I went from being like a fanboy, and then the next week I'm standing with Lee Child and Jeffrey Deaver and people. Here's the other thing: Jeffrey Deaver, when we first met, I mean, he famously wrote The Bone Collector. You know, the one that was made into the movie with Denzel Washington. And my first novel was called Dead Men's Dust. But when it was translated into German, it was translated into Der Knochensammler, I think it was, which translates as The Bone Collector. And when I first met Jeffrey Deaver, he gave me one of those kind of funny looks. He said, "Oh, you're that guy." And I was thinking, what have I done? You know, what weird, you know, so but we've stayed good, not good friends. He'll probably say, "Who's Matt Hilton?" You know, if you asked him. But no, but I've met him on several times, you know, and he's a great guy. As is Lee. I've met Lee many a time, and we're both smokers, which helped. I've since given up. I gave up smoking. Revelation, I gave up smoking last September, people. So yeah, but I was a smoker, so was Lee. So we'd often have a cigarette together outside, you know, venues, whether it be Harrogate or at Bristol at Crime Fest, or, you know, over in New York at Thriller Fest or one of the Boucher cons. I'd often be found, you know, smoking away and having a chat with likes of Lee. So it was good. So give me a 19.
Awesome, that's amazing.
I'm dropping, I'm dropping like crazy.
What's the most interesting thing you found doing research for your books?
Ooh. I kind of research on the go, and sometimes the research will determine how the next scene's written. I'm a bit of a pantser when it comes to writing, so I don't plot very much, albeit I do on occasion, but mostly I sit down, I have an idea, it's usually a theme, and off I go. And I'll kind of look for locations. I use like a Google Earth a lot to get my locations. What I want is to add realism, but then I can kind of play with it a little bit as well, you know, and fictionalize an area as well, you know, to my purposes. So I came across this is in Florida, and I came across this beautiful lighthouse, and I just thought I'm going to have to write that into my, you know, into my next scene. So there was never ever an intention to write this lighthouse into the book, but I couldn't not write it once I'd actually found it. So I find all sorts of weird and wonderful things, you know, and it just I can't think of anything specific off the top of my head at the moment, but you know, it'll end up going into the next chapter usually, because I write, you know, I write like that, chapter. I don't bounce around and come back or anything like that either. So usually something pops up. Something I did hear the other day which threw me. I write the second series of books I mentioned earlier with Tess Gray, who's a private investigator in Maine, in America, and I've been reading Stephen King for years, and he often sets his books in Derry, Maine, and I thought it was a real place. I absolutely thought Derry was a real place, you know, and it was just I was looking at the map, looking for location. Where's Derry at then? And I googled it and found out that it was blooming fiction, you know, and it's a fictionalized version of Bangor, man, apparently. But I thought it was a real place, so there you go. That was a weird thing I found out by doing research just the other day. Who knew? Who knew?
Not me. I saw that someone posted that on Facebook, and I was like, "What?" Yeah, I've read Stephen King since.
Me. Because it stunned me.
Yeah, since I was a teenager, I've read Stephen King. Yeah, no idea. Had no clue.
Apparently, somebody pointed out that some of the locals kind of call, I think, Bangor Derry, you know, as a local name for it or something like that, you know. So some of the locals call it Derry, but I'm unsure. You know, Derry, Castle Rock, and what's the other famous one? I can't think of now. Anyway, you know, but that was one thing that kind of threw me the other day. I thought, what? How can this be real? You know? But I'd only set 8 books in blooming Maine and hadn't realised that Derry wasn't a real place. I'm really pleased now that I didn't send them off to Derry, you know, because that would have been a real, you know, a real mess up. Explain that one, Hilton.
I'm sure you would have been the first.
Oh, nuts. I'll just claim it was fan fiction.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
What's your ultimate goal as an author?
I'd like to continue writing as long as people keep on reading, you know, so I'd like to be able to do that. I'd like just, you know, I've achieved a lot of the things that I wanted to do. You know, I wanted my byline on a book, and now I've got something like 30, you know, so it's wonderful. But each time you do it, it doesn't lessen your desire really to write. I'd like to, you know, make it so that I give my family a kind of comfortable life, you know, from my work. But, you know, I mean, the book business is difficult. I'm saying I've had 30 books, but I'm not a millionaire by any means or anything like that, you know. I've been lucky in that I've been able to do my job now for 13 years and be able to concentrate on it. I've been all around the world with it, you know, well, the Western world anyway, and seen some amazing things, met some amazing people. So I already count myself very, very lucky. you know. So I just want people to enjoy what I've written, and maybe give them some entertainment. One of the nicest things I ever get is I've had 2 or 3 variations of this where somebody says, you know, they'll send me an email and say thank you, you know, you've got me reading again, or I love your books, and you know, my dad loved your books before he died. I got recently, you know, and all these kind of things, and it's really, you know, it touches you there. And I like to think that, you know, I've got a kind of a legacy, you know, to leave behind me as well for my future, you know, where my grandkids will look and say, oh, my granddad was you know, a writer back in the old days, you know. It'll be one of those things. So I'd love to think that maybe they, you know, pick up a pen in the future and do whatever, you know, so it'd be lovely. So I know the kind of open-ended dreams, but yeah, that's the kind of things that I'd like from it. Yeah.
And do you read a lot?
I do read a lot. However, I think everybody's been the same. You know, over this pandemic, I'm finding that my head's in a bit of a fog, because I'm thinking about my wife, I'm thinking about my parents, I'm thinking about this. So I just haven't got my teeth into books lately at all. I've read about maybe 3 books in the last year, whereas normally I'd be doing that a month. You know, I see some people who read a book a day. I've never been like that. I'm a bit of a slow reader. My reading time tends to be an hour at bedtime, you know, and then I fall asleep reading a book or something. So I'm one of those readers. But I mean, like I said, this last year, it's been a real struggle to get my head into anything. Likewise with writing as well. I normally write 3 to 4 books a year. I've been known to write 3 to 4 books, and I've struggled really with my productivity. And I think it's just the old brain fog. But I got my first injection the other day, and you know, my wife's injected, so I'm a little bit easier in my head now, and you know, looking forward. So I think probably my productivity will pick up again. I can kind of feel it bubbling, dying to get let loose again. Unless that was a curry last night, I better watch out.
Yeah, I'm glad you're, however, many hundreds of miles away then. But do you hide any secret jokes or messages in your books that only a few people will understand?
Yes, and I also reference other characters and other books, you know, from my other books, and I like to drop in little mentions to other characters from my other books, and see if anybody's clued into, you know, that's such and such from, you know, into a Joe Hunter book. I'll mention something from a Tess Gray book or something like that, and see if there's any astute readers out there who will notice them. And I sometimes write, what do you call it, short stories as well. And I'll sometimes have the characters maybe in the background without naming them, you know, and see if anybody spots them. You know, so yeah, I've done little things like that. As for little subliminal messages and that, I've got my own back on some snarky reviewers. You know, some snarky reviewer might say something in the next book. I'll make a point of, you know, mentioning it, you know, in an equally snarky manner, you know. So yeah, you asked before what I wanted from writing. I just want people to read my books and enjoy them, but some people can be nasty, you know, and it's like, hey, hang on a minute, no need for that. You know, if you don't like the book, move on. You know, don't start with your personal attacks. I once had somebody who said Matt Hilton needs hit over the head and dumped in a canal. And I thought,
Nice.
you know, read another effing book. You know what I mean? if it makes you that bad, no, what's up with you? So stuff like that I don't like. So so
Yeah,
yeah,
no
so they got to mention, you know, in the next book. I was planning on dumping them in a canal, you know, but I thought, no, that'd be too blatant.
Yeah. What's your most embarrassing story?
Oh, I have an embarrassing story probably for most weeks of the year. Do you know something? I'm one of these guys. I like poking fun at myself. quite self-deprecating. So I don't mind telling people, you know, when I've done something embarrassing. I had an embarrassment yesterday where I had to go for an MRI scan on my spine. And I went in and I never even made it in the tube because I had a massive claustrophobia attack. And I had visions of me coming out that place like the Incredible Hulk, you know, smashing my way out through the wall. But really actually came out, you know, hanging my head in shame, walking down these metal steps, embarrassed to death, you know. And I got back to the car, my wife was waiting for us, and, you know, you were quick. I never even got in, you know. And she said she watched the blood had drained from my face, and she watched it coming back up my head, like, it was like a pint filling from the bottom, you know, and the colour came back into my face. But, you know, I don't mind admitting that. I had it was the mask on, the earbuds in, the earphones on, and then they came and they put this metal cage over my face. And then they said, you know, you can't move for half an hour, you have to stay dead still. And I'm thinking, I can't breathe, you know, and that was it. Once it's in your head, it's difficult to get shot off. And I cocked off in the end, and I had to come out, you know, so I have to rebook another MRI for the future when I don't have to wear this mask, you know, so we'll see.
Yeah.
But lots of things. Ask anybody. I have one of them stories, you know, I go on holiday and the plane crashes. True. I go on holiday and the boat, you know, the ship that we're on, some of the crew are killed. True. You know, we get in a taxi and another car crashes into the taxi. You know, true. You know, I'm that guy. And people think you must be making this up, but hand on heart, it's the gospel truth. And they keep saying, well, you're really unlucky. And I think, well, no, I'm not unlucky because I'm still here. I've survived the plane crash and the boat accident and the flipping car accident and that, you know, so I'm touched.
Oh, I thought I was bad enough. I was telling someone the other day that when I step foot out of my house, and especially if I'm going on holiday, then my luck tends to be bad. But you beat that by some distance. So that's quite nice to know, actually. It's kind of reassuring.
It's a running joke with some of my friends, you know, that, oh, what's going to happen this time, you know. So we flew out of Jamaica in a hurricane, and the storm, we were just on takeoff, and the lightning struck the engine and blew the engine up, and the plane done like a swing and ended up about 200 or 300 meters over on the grass, you know, on fire, you know. So and people wonder why I don't like flying, you know. So,
yeah, that would do it.
That was a bit of a hairy experience, but yeah. So yeah, a few embarrassing tales behind me when I look back. Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, all my holiday stories are generally missing planes and being robbed. Generally, that's pretty much.
Oh man, not good.
Yeah, a few times both as well.
Oh, hellfire! Been robbed? Did you say?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah. Twice. Well, once was my family and once was me. Yeah.
Fucking hell. Sorry to hear that.
Airline went bust.
I'm making light of it, you know, so I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, it happened. It's fine.
It happens. It does. It does.
Yeah. To be fair, though.
I left a bag with our passports and all our money in under a chair at a cafe out in New York, you know, and we walked away. And I think it was about half an hour before we realised, you know, and you know when you get that feeling of dread, and I ran back and it was still there. Miraculously, the flipping bag with all our belongings in was still there. So I had, you know, the worst case scenario going through my head, you know, at the time. But I'm lucky in that respect. So I'm not.
Yeah, I wouldn't have that luck. Yeah. What would those closest to you say your worst habits are?
My wife's just off camera and she just said some of that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I wondered if
I daren't
she could
repeat
shout a few out.
it. Snoring, singing out loud. I've got a bad habit of singing out loud. I say I've got musical Tourette's. I'm not making light of the subject, but I just don't realise that I'm singing and shut up. But apparently I don't know, but I'm like I said, I'm quite easygoing, self-deprecating, and everything else like that. I'm a bit of a know-it-all, I suppose. My missus says, you'll read it in the book, no doubt. So I can be a bit annoying in that respect, mansplaining as they call it these days. So, yeah. But other than that, I'm easygoing, and I like to think I'm a nice guy. I try to be a nice guy, So there we go. Hopefully what they say about us isn't too bad behind my back.
Who was your first celebrity crush?
Oh, first celebrity crush. Well, keep in mind my wife's sitting next to us. Probably, I can't even remember her name off the top of my head, but the character was called Wilma Deering, and it was Buck Rogers in the 25th century. And it was the lady in it who Buck Rogers kind of teamed up with in this sci-fi program from the late 1970s. So probably her. So I'd have to look up her name now, but probably the first time I was old enough to realise, beautiful women, and got a bit of a crush on her. So that was I was probably about 10 or 11 at the time or something like that. Sandahl Bergman out of Conan the Barbarian, probably as well. That's one of my favourite movies, the original one with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So the lady who played Valeria. That was another one. I had posters on my wall when I first met my wife, and she made me take them down, so I recall. So there we go. Yeah. So probably those two.
And if you were to invite 4 famous people to a dinner party, who would you invite?
Oh, can they be alive or dead?
Yeah, up to you. If your dinner party.
Right. I'd probably invite Robert E. Howard. Now, he was the author of Conan the Cimmerian from the 1930s. It was a huge influence on my writing. When I first started writing, I was probably writing pastiches of Robert E. Howard characters and stuff like that. Bruce Lee, the famous martial artist, I'd have him. Probably somebody like Brian Cox, the scientist, because I've got this real interest in quantum physics. No, I'm only joking. I've got alternative. I've got alternative ideas. I'm very much into paranormal and the supernatural and things like that, and I come at it from like a scientific perspective. But I'd love to think that some of my theories were workable, but I'd need somebody as clever as Brian Cox to keep me right. And be difficult now with any of my writing heroes, because I've met most of them. So at the expense of mentioning any of them, I'll go back and I'll say Bob Hope, the comedian. He's one of my favourites. It was either Bob Hope or Laurel and Hardy, but I realised we were already up to 3 people. So Bob Hope, for the fun. So they're the 4 people. So that I'd have.
And who's your ultimate writing hero that you haven't met yet?
Ooh. Trying to think of who I haven't met of my contemporaries. It's hard to say, really, really hard to say, because, like I said, I've met some of my writing heroes, like Jeffrey Deaver and John Connolly and people like that. So again, it'd have to be somebody from the past, and again, it would probably be somebody like Robert E. Howard or maybe Michael Moorcock or someone like that from the 70s who was writing back then. Don't know if you're familiar with these names, but
some of them.
yeah. So probably someone like that. They were big inspirations on me at the time. Another big inspiration on me was a guy called George G. Gilman, who I later found out was actually a house writer, and his name was actually a pen name, you know, and it was G.G. Gilman because he wrote books about cowboys, you know, and it was a G.G. and it was like Terry Harknett, it was really called. So I would have liked to have maybe chewed the fat with Terry and what they called the Piccadilly Cowboys at the time. These were guys in London writing westerns. They were based on the, you know, when Clint Eastwood and the spaghetti westerns were all made. There was a kind of resurgence in western books for men, and a lot of them were actually written by blokes who had never been further west than Wales, you know, that kind of thing. So, but the characters likes of, there was one called Edge, Joshua Hedges. There was another one called Jubal Cade. There was another one called The Undertaker. There was all these characters, you know, that I grew up on reading. And again, I was copying them when I was writing. So my style comes more from them than it does from Sherlock Holmes or Agatha Christie. So I would have liked to have known what their thought processes and that were at the time. So it'd be good to go back and see.
And what do you like to do when you're not writing?
When I'm not writing, I tend to, at the moment, not do an awful lot, to be honest, because there's not an awful lot to do. Luckily I live out in the country, and I live not far from the sea and not far from the Lake District and that, so I'm surrounded by beautiful landscape and that. But we don't really get very far, you know. I've probably got a radius of about 30 miles, you know, that we're driving around at the moment. You know, if we're going to Carlisle is the nearest city, you know, to where we live. We live about 20 miles west of Carlisle. So I like ordinarily to read, to write, to paint. I like doing a bit of painting when I can get a chance. I like rock and roll music from the 1950s. So I like going to like gigs with live music and things like that. It's not all happening at the moment though. So watch movies. Like I said to you, I've got an interest in the paranormal and stuff. So I'm often looking into, you know, paranormal stuff and weird stuff. If there's a mystery, I'm there. You know, I'm one of those kind of guys. I'm not gullible. I don't believe everything. I just believe, you know, that it's. If people are fascinated by it, why are they fascinated by it? So you don't have to believe there's a Loch Ness monster to be fascinated by the subject. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's where I come at it. So I'm fascinated by it. And if it all turns out that there's a perfectly reasonable scientific explanation, I'm happy. But it's until then, it's still a mystery, and it's, you know, sends me nuts. I'm one of these people, I'll go on a night time, just look up at the sky, you know, and feel like a tiny bug, you know, underneath all that magnificence, you know. So people say, how do you see so much? How do you experience so much? It's because I look for it. I actually look for it. So I come across stuff. So yeah, I'm a bit of a weirdo.
Not at all. Nothing wrong with that.
No, I just have an inquiring mind. So yeah.
So what's coming next for you?
I'm contracted at the moment to write book 9 in my Tess Gray series, so that's what I'm trying to do. I've written one chapter, and all I've got. It doesn't sound very action thriller this, but it is pertinent. She's making some pancakes, you know. That's as far as I've got. But I'm trying to get into it. I've got to deliver that for Seven House by September time-ish. So I've got a few months. I'm one of these who often have 3 or 4 books on the go at the same time. So I've actually got, I'm just looking down now, I've got 4 books in my that I'm working on at the moment. So 3 of them are outside of my usual remit, and they're probably standalones. when I dry up on the book that I'm working on, I'll often go across and do some work on the other one. It helps clear the mind, you know. So, but at the moment, like I say, I'm contracted to write the next test grade, so that's the one that I'll put my, you know, majority of my time into. After that, people are demanding another Joe Hunter novel. This is just that's just an ARC, a proof copy of the latest one. That was the one that came out most recently, called The Fourth Option. That's book 13 in the series, and I don't intend to end on an unlucky 13. Yeah, so there'll be more Joe Hunter for those people wondering, you know, before we're finished. And then who knows? I mean, like I say, I've got 3 other standalones that I'm working on, but likely another one will pop up into my head at some point, and I'll bash on with that one as well. So I'm writing one. I'd like to think that it's like an urban legend basis that come to life. Up here, when I was a child, we were terrified of, not the boogeyman, we were terrified of a character called Ginny Greenteeth. And I wanted to look at the you know, where did Ginny Greenteeth come from? And apparently, when I've done, you know, you were on about research earlier, I found out that it's actually synonymous. It's spread widely across this country, but mostly in that kind of north middle belt of England, where they had the canals, and the genie or Ginny or Wicked Jenny, and all those different names, and it was like a cautionary tale to keep the kids from going in near the canals, and it was the green algae that grew on the top. But you know, in our version, it was a witch with green teeth. Yeah, and that's so. I'm trying to write a story with that as the basis, but it's not a supernatural story. It's going to be a crime, but based upon that urban legend. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier about dumping somebody in a canal. Well, they will maybe get dumped in a canal in this one. Funny how things come around, isn't it? Yeah. So that's where we're going next with this. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I don't think I have any more questions for you, unless you think there's anything that I haven't asked you that you want to tell us about.
No, you've probably noticed by now I can gab on forever, so I better shut up.
No, you can't.
And no, just thanks very much, and thanks for having us done, and thanks for hosting us and being so kind, laughing in all the right places at all me naff jokes.
Yeah, that's ingrained. No, I'm joking. It's fine. So before we go, do you want to tell everyone where they can find out more about you and where they can find your books?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Facebook as Matt Hilton author, and I'm also have my website matthiltonbooks.com if anybody wants to look in there. I'm on Twitter as well, Matt Hilton author. So I'm around about. I like talking to people, as you probably noticed. So usually half my writing would be twice as long if I wasn't on Facebook all the time chatting with my readers and friends. So, yeah, my apologies, Denise, you forget I'm doing an interview. She forgot there, sorry. Yeah. She keeps me grounded.
Yeah, I can imagine.
She keeps me grounded. Yeah, so I'm around. I'm on usually online most of the time. And like I said, I have my website matthiltonbooks.com and Facebook. If anybody wants to have a look in, say hi. I'm usually there. And all my books are listed on Amazon and other online retailers and places, or in the bookshops as well. You can get the Joe Hunter books from most retail outlets. The test grade books tend to go into libraries as hardbacks, so they're a little bit they're not as easy to get hold of, but again, people who like the Joe Hunter books probably would like the test grade books as well. So there we go.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay.